Hola, familia.
Hi, this is James Noble.
This is Salon Gaganube.
Yo, this is David Mashamela. You're on
Happy Days.
Happy Days?
Happy Days.
Happy Days podcast.
It's a happy day to have a good day.
It's Happy Days on podcast. Ngendlela right is a happy day to have a good day. Thank you so much for continuing joining us as we celebrate and commemorate Women's Month, and we're doing it in a special way, in a special form, special everything. I must say, we are live at our very nice decorated building in Ilovo, that is in Sandton, Johannesburg in South Africa, and all over wherever you are, you're watching the podcast. Thank you so much, and I want to emphasize for those who haven't done likewise to subscribe with us. That really makes us look good if you do that. So please do that and subscribe. And as we continue really celebrating it, I'm having, should I call her an international model? I don't call it, okay, it's a South African born international model.
Indeed,
you know,
yes.
And then she's an activist and also a lawyer. You know, she's into law. So we're going to be just talking and digging everything about her. And at the same time, she's my daughter. Well, we'll get into that later on, why I'm calling her my daughter. Thank you so much for joining us, Thando.
Thank you, Putrich.
And it's been very long, I must say.
It's been long.
I said I
remember
wanna-
how long now? I don't
Yeah, I
even
do
remember.
remember. I said
I just know it's
I want to
been
mention
years.
it on air how long it is. If you remember, it was 2007, 2008. Yeah, during the times of Sunrise. Remember the program Sunrise
Yes,
on
no,
ETV?
but it couldn't have been that
I'm
long.
telling you. Well, you came maybe somewhere in between on ENC, but maybe not. You were not invited by me.
Yeah, no.
For me to meet you and just to have nice chats.
No, 2007. No, 2007. It's not. That's not possible because I think I was still in varsity.
but,
I know
but you were
myself.
already famous.
No, I think it must have been after. It has to be.
I know that you started to
2012,
actually
2013.
pick up somewhere 2012.
Yes,
isn't it?
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
But
yes.
thank you so much for gracing us.
Thank
I
you.
really enjoy that you come. You just made us to look good on Happy Days on podcast. Maybe let's start first by looking at your life whilst you were still little. I know that you were born 1989.
Yes.
So you must be 34. 34.
Yes,
Very,
yes.
very, very, very small. So it's this much. Yeah. So, and I know that your father is an engineer and
Yes.
your mother is a filmmaker.
Yes, yes.
Just take us at your upbringing because we share us this booking and it.
Yes.
Yes.
But actually, I didn't spend a lot of time gospelking. I ended up. It's okay if I mix.
Yeah, you too. Please do.
I ended up living in Goenedale and then eventually Lenasia South.
Okay.
So I actually was raised predominantly by my grandmother.
Okay.
And it was such a blessing for me because even now when I have my own daughter, my grandmother used to sing me a lot of Basotho songs that I now understand to be heritage. You know, at the time it was just songs that she was singing, but now I can pass them on to my daughter. But I grew up in a very singing family. And I think that was the earliest form of how I learned storytelling. And my father was an engineer, which was also quite rare at the time. And my mother was a filmmaker. So I think the combination of the two kind of started breeding into who I am as an adult. But also, I mean, we grew up, I think we were like 10 people in a household, which was very normal at the time.
Yeah, at that time, yes.
It was
We all grew up like that, yeah.
So, even though my mother was a working woman and my father was also just, he'd come back home quite late. I was a very parented child because I had my uncles and aunts and cousins.
So the upbringing was sharp.
Exactly,
Up to the point, yeah.
Very parented child. And the only thing is that, of course, like I had albinism. I didn't realize that for maybe the first 4 years of my life.
Yeah, you were just a child.
Exactly, I
Yeah.
was just a child. I think a lot of the times when you realize that there's some kind of difference between you and other people or discrimination even, it's reference. You have to see how you're being treated in reference to other people.
Yes.
In reference to Banabako High, I was
It was just
the
my child,
same,
yeah.
exactly, you know. In fact, maybe I just had like like special treatment because I was last born, you know. So, but then of course, you know, you move out of that sanctum of home, and then you have a very different experience because now you start meeting the ideologies of society,
the reality.
Exactly. And so but my upbringing was it was absolutely
I see
incredible.
you speak very fondly of your grandmother,
Yes.
especially.
Yes.
So maybe if you can describe the upbringing at Khulisa, especially because I know that you have about 3 siblings, and one of those siblings is also living with albinism.
Yes. So, so my grandmother was the kind of person who I would sit right next to her, and she would pour tea into like and drink with me, you know. But honestly, like I think the one thing I remember most, I mean, she was a very Christian woman, but one thing I remember most is her songs. She would sit down with me, and I think that's how I ended up speaking more Sesotho, even though
Okay.
I like my Xhosa is very pedestrian. It's embarrassing if I even try.
Okay.
But Sesotho Saka I'm far more fluent in Sesotho because really it is my mother tongue. It's my mother's tongue, you know, because my mother came Mosotho and my grandmother came Mosotho. So she would literally sit down and she would teach me these songs that carry stories of the Basotho people in several ways. And that is like the prominent feature of what I remember being home.
Yes,
you know, we sang a lot. I cannot sing to save my life, but I came from a
Don't
singing
worry,
family.
I only sing in my toilet.
Maybe even in the shower. That's a good place.
Yeah, too good.
So yeah, I think that is the prominent feature of really how I grew up.
But just fast forward, from 1989, maybe just to take it far as 1994. You know?
1994.
Yeah, that's where we're actually now including the society.
Yes,
you know, the
definitely.
societal elements with regard to the different person that they see. You know,
Definitely.
how was it? How was the society accepting you, and what were the challenges when you were growing? You know, see people even in school, you know, thinking, and all that.
Yeah.
And then before people starting to understand the issue of skin pigment.
Yes. So it's actually quite interesting because I think, you know, my mother was like intense political. 1994 also, you know, it was the advent of our democracy.
Okay.
And I remember like how she would it was the strangest thing. She used to buy me black dolls, but they were brown.
Okay.
They were brown. But it's so interesting that I at that time I was too young to really internalize, but I think the doll that she was buying me reflected my experience, even though it was not reflecting back my color. But, you know, so she really wanted me to kind of have a strong
feel
level
the same
of,
as is.
not even just feel the same, but I think she really wanted to, because everybody was Barbieing at the time, Barbie movies out there.
Yes.
But, you know, but everybody was Barbieing at the time, so a lot of people were buying me a lot of Barbie white dolls.
Oh, yes.
And she, you know, she was now buying me black dolls with you know, hair that is like kinky, which was very difficult to find. I actually don't know where she found those, you know, because so it was like I think in some sense she was kind of bringing me into the politics that I was about to experience. Now I went to school and I was very excited about going to school because my sisters were going to school. Now this is now my brother was like really a baby, so he was sort of irrelevant in this conversation.
Okay.
But, you know, I really was very excited about going to school. And I grew up now, at this point in time, I'm in Lenasia South. So Lenasia South is, we could say it's a mixed community. But again, we are still moving out of apartheid. So we were still very grouped.
Okay.
So us being black people in a place like Lenasia South, which was a predominantly Indian township, we were not a majority, you know, exactly. We were not a majority because people were only beginning to move into different neighborhoods because remember, we were still very, very grouped at the time. So anyway, so going to Lenasia South, but still, even though, I mean, you have colored people, Indian people, and black people, you do not have people with albinism, and you don't even have white people. So I literally am the only person wherever I go who has my skin,
like everyone
who has
was
my
like
skin color, you know. So, you know, I go to school, and the first day of school, the children who I'm sitting next to move away from me. I just hear someone say, "Don't sit next to her." And they just move. And then I'm trying to see who don't sit next to who, you know? Because I had not internalized my difference at all by that time. But within a week, I understood very much.
What have I done?
Exactly. And I didn't even go to speak to my parents about it, because also I think as a child, I didn't even know how to translate myself. I didn't know what to say was wrong.
Yeah,
you know?
Mama, I mean,
exactly. Exactly. I couldn't translate myself at all. So all I started doing was I was sick all the time. I'd tell my mom, I'm always sick. I don't want to go to school. I'm sick, you know. And that was really the only way I could communicate to her that I don't want to be in that environment. It's hostile. And, you know, by the time now I started changing schools quite often. One of the reasons actually why I changed schools, this I never actually really spoke about, is corporal punishment was very normal in when we were growing up. But my parents didn't exercise corporal punishment over us. And so there was a teacher who really was very excessive with his corporal punishment. And my father then decided to take me out of the school.
Okay.
But the next school I went to, it was kind of the same thing until
I think we're experiencing the same all of us.
Exactly.
You know? Situation
yeah.
Whether was it taking out the stress
exactly.
You can't even be sure now.
Exactly. So I was constantly going into different schools. By the time I went to the next school, I already knew my position. I knew my social position. So the anxiety started spiking. And every time I go into a very new situation, how would people receive me? And I even remember, like, when I got to Standard 5, I only did the school for the year. But my first day, I even fell while I was trying to get into a queue because I was so anxious. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. I could literally feel them. And so, you know, I kind of went into high school, and you learn how to adapt to your circumstances. And somewhat, you know. But one thing I soon realized is that, I mean, everywhere I looked, never mind magazines and television, there was that too. But even within my family, the people who, my cousins and my brothers, or who would say, hey, this person is attractive, or all of these people looked nothing like me. So what I started doing is when I got to matric, I just decided I'm going to just dye my brows, I'm going to dye my lashes. You know, I was like, this albinism thing, I've had it. I am not having albinism anymore. And you know, by that I mean,
I can imagine,
you know, I mean, of course, you know, doing whatever it is that you want to do is completely fine. You can like dye your hair, dye your brows, dye whatever, do whatever. But I think for me, it's just that the phenotype of albinism comes with sort of the so-called lack of pigmentation in your eyes and your hair. So my brows were always lighter than my skin. When most people, their brows like, you know, that darker than my. So it actually like your face and your features come out more prominently. I was the only one who did not have that, you know. And I decided I'm done. So I decided to reduce the phenotype by. And I remember my mother, I got back, I left one way and I came back looking another way because my mother was just like,
what happened? What happened?
What's happening? What's that? Because I didn't think she was thinking, how did you even get to, where did you get the money? And I just saved up, you know. She was shocked. She was shocked, but she was also hurt because I think she started understanding how much I had internalized, that I was hurting. So yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk about all the challenges up until you ever even reach tertiary. And you are still on Happy Days on podcast. We have Thando Hopa, the internationally, she's a good friend of mine, I must say. And Thando, I know we're coming from Women's Day. I wanted to ask, and Happy Women's Month, by the way. I wanted to ask you, how did you spend your Women's Day? Very important, because this episode, in fact,
oh my gosh, did I even spend it? You know what the thing is, actually, I was explaining this to somebody, is that, I work on a consultant-based model. So even if you're modeling or whatever, it is kind of very an ad hoc model. I almost feel like holidays, I don't really digest holidays.
Okay.
I know that sounds really weird to say, but I don't.
But this one has got a very whole lot of significance into it.
I know, but I don't really digest my holidays, because I think one of the reasons is that when you are in that kind of model, you choose the days that you can rest and absorb.
Oh yes, yeah.
And sometimes in those days you're still working anyway, So I don't think I absorb my holidays in the same way that you would if you actually need have the day off, as the employment model, you have the day off, so you're far more committed to absorbing the holiday,
Yeah.
So I think more than anything on that day, I was just
chill.
I was just really running through
maybe
whatever.
I should put my question in a very different form.
Yes.
Maybe to say what Women's Day means to you or Women's Month, as to say.
I think
with regard to where we're coming from as the country.
I think it's I think it's one of those days that reminds you of the resistance of the feminine, that women are an integral part of society. I think this is the thing that sometimes, even in our politics, that we forget between men and women, is that we are social partners. And, we have a history. I think just all cultures have a history of, not all actually, let me not say that, a lot of cultures have a history of really treating women in a way that is that subjugates them.
Oh, yeah.
And I think just these are those markers in history each time that show you the power and the resistance of women. And I think it's just one of those times that kind of reminds you of the feminine force and the power that it actually holds within it. But also I just, apart from really generally what we celebrate in Women's Month, or what actually marked Women's Day, I just think it's one of those times where we have to look at how far we've come. There was a time when women had to fight for a lot. There was a time when, you couldn't be raped if you were married because you were somebody's property. There was a time when you couldn't own land. We're fighting for land now. But landlessness is really one of those ways where you sort of control certain bodies, because then you remove their form of security, you remove a whole host of things. And I think that we have really come so far, even as a society, in terms of how women are, seen as economic, social, and cultural beings. It's not. I do think we've come a long way. Yeah,
but I would think it is somehow disappointing that we're coming from that milestone 28 years since it was declared the 9th of August as Women's Day, that we still haven't reached emancipation of women. We're still talking the very same issues. I can imagine that since then, women, 1956, they were fighting. Now we should have been fighting a different struggle. But as you find certain issues are the very same struggle that Mama Beto, Mandela, they were fighting for, So I can imagine, that is why I was asking you, because I can imagine you living with albinism, up until this time, where, just other women, just generally, they were suffering. Maybe it was even difficult for you guys, for people. I remember during the early days,
I think also just when we're talking about emancipation of women, I think with time, dialogue, I think we need to really we need to really craft what we want that to look like. You know, I think that the times when we're running and there's so many narratives that are going on what our emancipation is, that I would like us to have more further dialogue on what we actually want it to look like. For me, I look at myself now far more holistically, and I'm going to speak from a very separate point of view in that I'm really speaking for myself. But as much as you are a career person, I also have really started integrating my ideas of care work now being a mom, you know, and how we moved into the space of feminism. And we were trying so hard to ensure that we are economically mobile. From first wave, second wave feminism, this was really it, because the thing is, if you do not have economic mobility, it is much easier, for lack of a better word, to be controlled.
To be controlled, yeah.
But also at the same time, I think that the dialogue of what motherhood is and what it means, I don't know if we have given that sufficient status in feminism, you know. So how do we holistically create the idea of emancipation where all different identities of womanhood are embraced, supported, and celebrated, you know? So yeah, but that being said, going into like albinism, you know, I remember like Umam Nomasonto, she, Umam Nomasonto Mazubugo,
Yes.
Yeah, she used to actually go door to door. That woman used to go door to door to find out if there are people who have albinism in the house and teach parents who would say, hey, you know, you've got a child with albinism. This is you need to put on sunscreen, etc.
Yes.
I mean, you can imagine just the level of resources she needed to have within herself, just herself, to go and actually find and educate people. And, you know, she tells the story where in her community, people around her community didn't want her to teach. I don't know whether it was her community or a different community that she was going into. But they didn't want her to teach in that community because they were like, we are not going to be taught by a person like this.
Yes.
And I think that her work has manifested in ways where you're looking at people who have albinism now move into different fraternities in ways that we never imagined. I know there was a time when, this is, I guess, a little bit of a, I don't know if it's, I get it, but I don't know if I'm spilling tea.
But you have to.
You know, I think that one of the things is, and this is there's a professor in the United States, Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality. And intersectionality basically looks at how different identities that have a history of discrimination and oppression intertwine with each other. So for me, it would be me being a black person, me being a woman, me having albinism, and me being an African. All of those identities generally have a level of oppression and discrimination that they carry with them. But I think one of the things that has happened with the albinism, in the same way that has happened with blackness in general, is that I think albinism carried with it, I don't know if I can say, a class-related issue. So people never expected people with albinism to be in high positions because generally we were going through social exclusion, you know, we had issues that of disability, so you can't finish school, or some schools that you're going to do not equip you properly for you to be able to go into the job market, or even in the job market you're not really received that well, or so there were all of these issues, and you found that a lot of the times people with albinism were in economically vulnerable situations. When that changed, you know, I remember that I don't know how many times I've heard it from a deputy minister, I've heard it from producers, where people would tell me how lucky I am that I had an education, or how lucky I am that I can travel, or, you know, it was like, when people wanted me to do something, they always reminded me of my position, you know, like, you are so lucky that you had an education, so how can you refuse to do ABCD? Just an education. You are lucky that you even became a prosecutor. I've literally had that. Some of it is on record, you know, and I think it's because there was a level of class issue related to the the oppression and the discrimination of people with albinism. It was the result of the oppression and the discrimination. So now when you move up, there was something that made it confrontational, even to our own people, But I think that with time, and this is the thing, is that things generally change when you have critical mass. So the more people you have in a certain situation, while there's still a minority, if you still have, for instance, just going back to women, if you have women who are not that many women in STEM, there's going to be this level of hostility that just is going to be imposed on their beings. So every time you go to work, you know that you're being questioned. Are you able to do this? Are you able to be a scientist? But the more critical mass you have, the more that perception changes. So I think this is the thing with albinism, even in media. How I started in media in 2012, the narrative and the perceptions have definitely changed right now in 2023 because you also have critical mass. You're having enough people with albinism pop up in different spaces for us to have broader conversations and narratives than what I was experiencing in 2012.
Oh man, I must say you're really a constant champion for matters of self-love.
Thank you.
and self-acceptance, which is very important in so many challenges that we actually encounter in life, So that is why we call the show Happy Days on Podcast, because I always say that happiness is by choice. We always have all challenges that you can name, but it's honestly up to a person to wake up and say, just to face life, no matter how difficult it is. You find people committing suicide. There are really challenges. You tend to not judge people if they're doing certain things, because you don't know what are they really going through in life. So if you can paint a picture to Umzali out there who's just got a child, and a child is happened to be having a condition of albinism, and in terms of, because I remember when we grow up, I used to hear a lot of people, our elders saying, labantwana abazalwa bakanje, in fact umzali wakhe mangaba kanamali kuba nenkinga, because you need to make sure ukuthi the condition skin yadura, sunscreen and all that. Maybe what can you say to just a lay parent who doesn't have anything, and then it's like, oh wow, this is what God decided to say He's embracing me with.
I think, if there's one thing I can say, I don't know if I can say if I can say rest assured. Because one of the things is, again, when I started in 2012, an interesting thing was also happening at the time. There was a UN independent expert that was appointed for matters surrounding albinism. If you look at where albinism is now, you have people who have formed institutions, task forces to ensure that persons with albinism are actually, they have a fruitful future in education, in health, in rights. The fact that albinism now is viewed as a disability also allows persons with albinism to have resources in terms of rights that they never had before, because initially people never considered your sensitivity to the sun or your short-sightedness as a disability. Really, they'd just be like, oh, you struggle with these things, but those things actually affected your day-to-day life. It affected your education, your employment opportunity. It affected all of those things. So now you are in a position where you can even get grants, etc., because you have people who are fighting for this thing. When I started in 2012, the independent expert, there's a different one now, but still the mandate is the same. She consolidated everybody. The first time I met Rufilo Modise was because of a Nigerian woman who went to the UN and decided that she's going to fight for this mandate to be created. That was the first time I met Rufilo. We were sitting down in a panel. It was the UN consultation phase of the policy discussions on the action plan regarding albinism. She went to every country, to consolidate media, education, law. She consolidated all of us to ensure that as a unit, we actually work towards an action plan locally for persons with albinism. So the first thing is, know that there are people who are fighting for your child to have a fruitful economic, social, cultural future, you know. And secondly is, I do think that, you know, sometimes you read these self-help books and I feel like they're a bit privileged in their views, because I think sometimes we overly place on the person too much weight for them to be you know, happy and feel good and self-love. Yes, indeed, attitudinally you need to have like a very good attitude in terms of your life, because you need to protect your optimism. You need to also be able to believe that the future can improve. It's a form of sustenance. If you start believing that the future cannot improve, you are not sustaining yourself. That's why you will start moving into depression. But it is also the resources around us. Who we have in our lives is fundamental.
Very important.
It influences the quality of our energy, our spirit, you know. Like, so as a parent, I would just say, be consistent in being supportive, in being loving no matter what. Be consistent in being a safe space and creating a safe space. And also, you know, there was this thing that, you know, me and my mother used to debate about it. Because, you know, my mother, when I grew up, she wanted me to really find my own way. So she didn't really want me to be part of like albinism organizations. In retrospect, I think she was still right. There's no right or wrong way, you know. But I also think that it is important for you to see other people who have the same experience as you. Otherwise, it may just be too alienating. You know, there are people who now I speak to who are close friends of mine who have albinism. They understand my situation or how I need to solve a particular problem better than some other people who are very close to me.
So living in a vacuum.
Exactly.
Won't help,
Exactly. But also I would say that I would really encourage for you to allow them to have friends who have albinism, but also try to get the range if it's possible. People with different identities, you know, like, so people who have albinism, who don't have albinism, people who have disabilities, people who are queer, people who are whatever. The reason is just people. People in their different lives. Because people in different lives, first of all, they show you different experiences of humanity, but they also show you different ways of approaching the difficulties that just come with life. You know? And I think that kind of exposure helps a child feel so much more grounded. So allow them to meet and see as many different types of humanities as possible. That exposure, I think, is actually fundamental. So yeah, but I don't know if there's anything else.
But maybe moving on and continue with your academic experience.
Yes.
Have you planned to be a lawyer?
I didn't plan to be
get
a
into
lawyer.
the law.
So I became a lawyer because of my father.
And she was an engineer.
I was not old enough to pay for my own studies. That's really just what happened. Me and my father had a disagreement.
Academic parents.
Exactly. My father wanted me to be an accountant, actually.
Okay.
I wanted to be an actress. So we kind of found our way in law.
But you were closer to that as well because your mother was a filmmaker.
Exactly. You know. My father was like, there's no way. There's no way. He's like,
we need security.
He's like, you can go and act wherever you like, but I'm not going to pay 4 years for you to go and act. He was like, no. He was like, So we reached kind of that, we had an ideological difference. And then I ended up just doing law because I didn't want to do accounting. And so, and also, I mean, I was watching your Boston Legals and stuff. So, I mean, I was like, hey, there's a bit of acting here. Did I not know how dreary South African law? There was none of that drama. Like,
it was different.
Exactly. I was this very, I our law is still very English, in its
Okay.
style. It's
Yes.
not, so what you see as presented in
So
American,
It follows the line of our colonizers.
yes, indeed, so it does. Indeed,
Yes.
so it does. Even like all our common law, Roman Dutch law, all of that stuff, you can see that it really, the fabric of it is from our colonial past. But anyway, so what I took from a space of interest is prosecuting. So when I started doing something called street law, where I would go and I would help communities understand the law. And I remember once I was sitting down in a prison and I was like watching these young men who were very, very smart in a maximum sentence prison, and I was trying to teach them criminal law. I don't even remember why we had to go to a prison to do that, but it was one of our assignments, and we did that. And I just thought to myself, I was like, you know what, I think I want to do the kind of work where I am actively transforming my society. Now, this is interesting for me because when I became a prosecutor, I think I was more an executor and an implementer of justice.
Okay.
But I don't think I was an activist, if that makes sense. Yeah,
okay.
At that time. The job, the format of the job is activism. But I think my character was more on I'm implementing, but I wasn't asking myself crucial questions like, this law here, or this case here, can I take it up to the Constitutional Court for it to change A, B, C, D,
To just
also,
challenge matters.
Exactly, to actually change the framework of society. And I say that, but also at the same time, maybe I was, I was always the youngest prosecutor wherever I was. So maybe also youth is part of it, and maybe with time I would have developed that character. But I find that very strange that I actually don't think that in character I was an activist, even though I was doing activism work. But when I was in media, initially I kind of went through the passivity of it. So people called me an activist, but I don't think I really was. I was just like, okay, I got discovered by Haj Johan. I said, okay, you know what, I want to portray albinism in a positive way. But then I was just going through interviews this way and that way. But I don't think I really understood what the hell was happening. I was receiving like all these news coverages and everything. And I was just like, what is going on? And I would read the news coverages and I would feel an injury and I wasn't sure why. Like, one of the things that happened is, for the longest time, even in South African media, I lost my name. And it's so interesting because I forget the first guy who interviewed me, and he called it the new face of fashion. He wrote such a brilliant, wonderful, empathetic, human-inspired interview that my expectation was that was what was going to repeat itself.
Yes.
Next thing, it was nothing like that. It was very stereotyped. And the term, it was just like albino model.
Oh.
It wasn't even like Thando Hopa, I almost feel like I had to start working to actually
restore.
be named,
Yes.
So it was just kind of that, like a whole host of things. And it was like, can we interview you about your fashion style and everything? And I'd be talking about my fashion style. Then all of a sudden it's like, albinism is a genetic disorder.
What's going on?
What happened? Am I reading about fashion or am I reading a medical article? But there was that constant, and I started feeling like there was that constant reminder that you're not supposed to be here. There's a space where people play in fashion and beauty. We're just inviting you. You're not supposed to be here.
Yeah.
So each time I felt like these explanations of, okay, this is why we're interviewing her, guys, oh, shame, she's a person with a genetic disease, or, honestly, that's what I started feeling. So I started being very intentional with the projects I started choosing. I'd be like, even if those projects paid me next to nothing, if the project could expand the narrative and the perception of albinism for people to see me as a woman, as an African, as a what, I would go for the project, because I would be like, I needed to look at this body and see all the different stories I could put this body in order for people to appreciate the human complexity of the body. So I started being very strategic, and it's like, to just tell you how weird this would get. Because I know you wanted to talk about Pirelli, but we'll talk about it still. But I was sitting, so okay, fine. I was sitting in Pirelli. I got to Pirelli, they cast me as, and when they cast me, nobody really knew me, like there was Whoopi Goldberg and Puff Daddy and all of that. Mina, I was like, who, And but then one day, it's actually so crazy what happened there. One day, I was trying to find this guy because I was, he was, I forget what he was there, but I was like, you know what, I need to ask him because I wanted to look into pursuing acting as a career. So I'm like, and he's like, oh, no, let's talk about it. Because I was looking at, would I actually find something in the United States? Because also the reason why I was looking at the United States is because I was getting requests to act here in South Africa. Okay. But I felt like the storylines could not imagine the body of albinism outside of social exclusion. Okay, yes. And just the whole Muti and all of, and I was like, I'm looking for a place where I can find other stories that can, and it's not that to say that the stories about Mutis are not important. They are very important to educate society. But they become a problem if they're the only stories that were available.
Because that's exactly what they were, when you're making a movie, a drama, as you talk about that.
Exactly, so I'm busy like knocking on the door, opening, I'm looking with this guy, I'm knocking, hey, then I knock on this door, and then I see him, and he's like, oh, hi, Thando, come in. And I'm like, hi. When I open, there is just like a world full of media. And I'm like, and then they just call me and they're like, oh, you can come and sit down. Like, go, come sit down. When I sit down, I'm like, I'm just like greeting everybody, hello.
Yeah, hello.
Then they're like, okay, no, please sit down. Yeah. I sit down, and they give me a mic. I'm like, whoa, what's happening? Like, this escalated quickly. They give me a mic. And I, like, just then and there, this is world media. I'm being interviewed. Had no clue. We've just shot. And the thing is, none of them also knew that I had a legal background.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So now they're asking me intense questions. Do you think that, you should have a white photographer for this? Because there was a white photographer. White photographer, do you think that this thing is like racially divisive? And like, you generally are briefed for that kind of intensity. But also, I think, honestly, when I was answering that day, I almost felt like a muse just came into my body. Because I calmed down and I grounded myself. And I also remembered the vision of everything that I do in terms of each and every project. And so anyway, we deal with all of that. Then they're thinking, wow, we didn't know that, like that you could even articulate yourself this way, or because I was just supposed to be,
doesn't know anything.
Now, then they asked me to come in for a, what do you call these things? PR junket.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And now I'm sitting with Whoopi Goldberg and Ducky Thought. Again, nobody knows me. Right, and then there's also Tim Walker, who was the photographer. Nobody knows me, so they asked him, about the creative, why did he decide Alice in Wonderland, etc. They ask Whoopi about Alice because she also wrote a book for her child, which was about Alice and all of that. They ask Ducky about the importance of representation, and she was also like, they ask her about how she feels about being considered the Black Barbie. Now it's my turn. They look at me, there's just silence. And then somebody goes, tell us about the albino killings in Africa.
Imagine.
Talk about like an awkward situation.
Yeah.
And also, this is the thing, that's why intersectionality is so important, is that now I'm in a predominantly European American audience. I cannot, when I speak about Africa, I had learned this now in my previous interviews. When I speak about Africa, I'm not in a safe space. It's not like Maskuluma about our problems.
Yes.
It's not the same. They immediately, inherently racialize it. Oh yeah, you people kill each other, vele. You guys do voodoo, vele.
Yeah.
So because that.
So you don't know how to position yourself.
Exactly. Like I was like, how do I answer this? Because it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because you do want to put on a world platform. Exactly. And you want to put the issues on a larger platform so more people can be helped. Because people are being killed for Muti, stigmatized, all of that stuff. All of these things are very real. And they're happening, right? So you want to put them on loudspeaker, but in some places, you put them on loudspeaker, and all it does is it reinforces the racial stereotypes on Africans. And I'm an African. It's not like I'm half albinism, today I'm African, tomorrow I'm albinism. I'm all of those things constantly. So I feel like these are my two identities that are my home, my everything I care about. And now they're placed in a it's like they're made to fight against each other, And you know what? Like, honestly, in certain situations, I have learned to kind of, I said to a friend of mine, when somebody asks you a question, it is your choice on whether you want to answer the question, So I went into it in that I spoke about discrimination en masse, the issues involving discrimination and prejudice en masse, So I talked about it. I said, this is the issue with albinism, but you see it's also reflected in race, because I need to remind them too about their issues regarding difference, So it was just like, but yeah, so it was,
Yeah, I can imagine. Maybe we can talk about the positive stuff.
Yes.
We'll talk about you meeting Johan Kutsi. When we come back. It's still Happy Days on podcast. We're going to Fihla Matambo. I'm calling him Fihla Bones. Out in the Sanganayo. So Sanganela Nane as we continue on Happy Days on podcast. Stay tuned.
We don't laugh because we're happy. We're happy because we laugh.
But I need to say
Shapuze bafethu ufihla amathambo lo Vienna amshona yazibuza ukuthi ufihla amathambo yalo wava ngithathwe lenyanga elilambla no doctor lithi hayi sharp shy round siye lapha ebhara ngibona ukuthi lisipana kanjani vele li psychiatrist khotman lam lapha hayi moja ngiyakhapha grand masifika la ngimangele mina ngiphethe manje ngithenga namavuvuzela ayi4 hayi sifike lapha sharp la ngifake odini vele la labantu bama-psycho vele ukuthi alright hayi la sizosebenza lababiza uzani bafethu namhlanje soshaya penalty la ozoyikora uyahamba ekhaya la bafethu ngapha siphethe neHotman elihamba ngekerevu kanti boy walapha esibhedlela uphethe lelitshe leli round leli ngathi ibhola leli ufake ekeriveni lapha lelihlobisa lapha umagalini asifike lapha athi hayi yazini beka phansi lebhola goli hayi leHotman lehlisa ilitshe libeke lapha Khotman lami lihambe lebonweni ligcoka ipali manje ngakathi vele ipali lokuvimba lithi lo baba kaNiboya lithi goal manje bahambe ipalini phela kuzoshwala ama penalty hayi zime inkalakathi asikhethe ma-5 aside azishaye ziyaphuka zonke kuphuka inyawo kunama paramedics la aloku ayanceda la thatha abantu phansi phezulu baya ngale bofaka ama-ice cream kusale eyi-1 inkalakatha la lekakha manje uyayibuza ma wayi wena sifisa ungafuni ukushaya ipenalty wami ngoba labe wabona basekho basiseba emakhaya wena ufuna ukora ipenalty wami ithi mina ngeke ngikwenze lokho uthi hayi ngikwenze lokho ngikhabe ibhola elinje hey uthi ayisho uright-ke lo athi ngibize yabo lona manje bazombona ukuthi umuntu lo shuthi akusekumele manje aphume manje athi wayi ungafuna ukukhaba uthi linjani le bhola athi angeke ngikhahlele ibhola elingabhontshwanga yabuze ibhola liphapho wena awuzama umzamo uthola ipompe lebhola.
Hello, this is Thando Hopa, and my message to the Happy Fellows on Happy Days on Podcast is that for all the women out there, remember your sovereignty, your agency. Remember that you are power personified.
Yeah, as you can see, we're laughing. We're back on Happy Days. So it's Fihla Matambo. I'm just umsangano nje kodwa nje. Ayikho into ahlangane aza ngayo lana. Asenzela yona. Sangane mama umuntu othanda umsangano. I'm sure you must be really enjoying Fihla my bones. Here on Happy Days, we continue with our nice conversation for a special episode of Women's Month as we feature. So next week we're going to be featuring the entire month of August. We're going to be featuring prominent women who actually made it in South Africa and abroad, just to paint a very beautiful picture of our country, you know, and at large. So I wanted to talk about 2012. So 2012, like an ordinary girl who's going, you know, because I assume it was a weekend. You were going to a mall, just like any other citizen, going to do some shopping there, and then you met her. What happened there?
So actually we were coming back from watching a movie, and I just see this man dressed in black, and he had sunglasses in the mall. I was like, that's so dramatic.
Oh, I thought it actually come out nicely. No, you are so dramatic.
No, it's not. The was like, this man has sunglasses in the mall, but it was very fashionable, of course.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I have sunglasses in the mall. But because now he comes and he approaches me, but you could definitely like spot him, you know, because he just had that
glamour.
That thing, yeah, he was glamorous. And so he comes to me and he's like, oh, you know, hi, you know, would you be interested in modeling? And I was like, and actually I had people ask me this before, but I paid it no mind. And so I took his card and I eventually went back. I actually lost the card for some time, actually. I lost the card because I had no interest. I didn't even know who he was, you know. And at the time, I think he was, it was like at the reign at which he was, like him and Bonam were doing a lot of work together. But I still am very...
and you were doing well with your career anyway.
Yes, exactly.
To be even interested.
But I'm not really too clued up on a lot of media things, you know. So I just didn't know who he was. And then people were like, you don't know who
I know. He came into our studios once, and especially ladies.
Yes.
Can I check with her? When I reached her, I was like, what?
Because you know what? Like, is he can make your body look like a masterpiece. Yeah, like when he dresses you, he can make your everything around you just look like a masterpiece. You know, like you really do feel like a goddess when he has dressed you. And so I mean again, I'm just like, I don't know this man. I'm like, oh, you know. So and then eventually my sister spoke to me and she was like, you know, you can change so many perceptions about the albinism through this medium. And I was like, at the time I was beginning my prosecutorial career. Again, also I was the youngest prosecutor there. So I just wanted to be like the most bomb prosecutor. I was like, I don't have time for this other stuff, you know. And even then, even when I went to him, I said, you know, I wanna represent albinism in a positive way. That was like my condition. And I don't think I really understood the depth of the complexity of media representation at the time. And also that I'm not going to just be dealing with albinism as a representation. I'm going to be dealing with the representation in terms of me being black, in terms of me being a woman, in terms of me being an African. All of those things matter all the time. And so, yeah, but anyway, we did e-fashion week. Believe it or not, I couldn't even walk in heels. He gave me a pair of heels to walk in for like 2 weeks. And the whole time, if you see that first thing, in Fashion Week 2012, I'm flying through. I'm just like, please don't fall. Please don't fall. Please don't fall. Exactly. I just wanted to finish. You know, and I used those same heels. They were like really, like, they didn't even go with the dress, but the dress was big enough to hide the heels. But because those were the only heels I could walk in, I had to put the same heels to walk, you know. So, but even then, I still did like maybe 3 shows a year or something. I really went into modeling very slowly because I had a full-time career. So yeah, that was 2012.
And then it actually expanded to be something else, I must say.
Yes, it did.
A huge recognition. Can you just tell us about your experience with the Vogue magazine? Because you're the very first woman living with albinism to be actually featured there, and African.
Yes,
you know,
yes,
all the elements.
Yes.
You know.
So actually, you know what? When they requested me to do a Vogue cover, I always felt like it was going to go. Like, you know, I had gotten so used to, by that time, and this was 2019, I got quite good at managing my disappointments, you know, because the problem is in 2012 when I started, even if I was like, I want to represent albinism in a positive way, I viewed myself like everyone else in the industry. Like, you know, you think that, okay, if I pitch this number, you know, because this other person pitched that, this will make sense because this one, no,
Yeah.
you know, I was very different. And by the time I got to like 2019, I literally was thinking, but why would you go to somebody who doesn't have like 4 million people in Instagram? Because in terms of Sadek, you know, yes, because the other lady who was there was Alec Work, yeah.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that at the time. But I was like, there are a lot of people where you can garner way more publicity, you know. So I just thought they're gonna come back and say, oh, sorry, we can't do this anymore. So I agreed, thinking this is not really going to happen. And then now we're going for the shoot and it's really happening. Now when it's happening, my anxiety is even growing more because I'm just like, because they don't know that I am the first woman with albinism.
Yeah,
I know that.
Yeah.
You know, I know that. And even just as a black woman in South Africa, like being on those kinds of internationally influential platforms, really the access is very difficult for us. And I'm just sitting there, and then it happened. And also, what really surprised me is how compliant they were. If I said, no, I don't want to do that, I don't feel comfortable doing that, they were like, okay, because I would be like, I'm going to tell them that I don't want to do this, you know, like, and I would think that, okay, they're going to come with like, basically, you know, would say, hey, who do you think you are? Yeah. No, like, they were entirely compliant. And the images that came out from that shoot, I love, you know, because I feel like they have my DNA, because when I said, not here, not there, they were completely fine. I liked my hair, natural, they were completely fine with all of that, you know. And so, yeah, so when it happened, and now I actually saw it, because each time I was like, this thing is not going to go through. I was like, I was managing my disappointment because I just did not want to feel vulnerable about it. So I did it, but I was like, it's not really, you know, don't even worry about it. And then when it happened, I felt this huge sense of relief. And people ask me like, weren't you happy? I was not happy. I was relieved.
Oh yes, I was about to ask why.
It was like, relief I explained as the dying of tension. Because it was like, it did happen. And now I also felt like, hey, it did happen. So now we really are participating.
Yes, we're part of the society.
Exactly. Not even just society, but I just felt like in media there was always that thing like, we're doing you a favor. Nobody would really pick you, you know. Like, and I didn't have that relationship with Khad, but as I was moving, there was always that undertone. You would say, hey, you guys are not really represented here. You should just be happy that you're represented. So I felt like Vogue was one of those things where I, as well as many people like me, had to prove less.
And everyone must say, when people talking about you, that you just remember that Vogue.
The Vogue.
Yeah, no, that one. Exceptional. I must say.
And very simple. It was simple, but it was so tastefully done. And I think it was just, I felt like there was a weight that just lifted. And I felt like through that, it made not just my life, but several people in this industry who have albinism, their life a little bit more easier when negotiating the space. Because now you could be on platforms of influence. So it kind of just, but I never really got to enjoy it. I never really got to feel like, yay! More than it was just like,
you were just a relief.
Yeah.
But it didn't end there.
No,
the Princess of Hearts.
Yeah, yes. But actually, the Princess of Hearts happened before. I think the war was just one of those things that was bigger, you know. And yeah, I think it was just bigger. But it's just interesting that after Vogue, I think my career took more of, I don't know if I can say an academic route that I didn't intend, because after that I became a fellow at the World Economic Forum. And it was like, what is a model doing here? Honestly, and I think this was the thing, it's like the one thing about my career trajectory is I was always an outlier. You know, wherever I went, it was just like, okay, this is interesting, you know. We didn't expect someone like you here, you know.
Yes.
But yeah, so.
But it started to actually confirm what you were saying, that you were using albinism in a positive way, you know. So I remember also there is, if I'm not mistaken, the according to the British American Mysteries, where you actually were also featured on the Fall of the City. If you remember that one.
Yes.
Yeah. That was just before you actually were awarded the one of the 100 Women Awards.
Yes.
And tell us more about specifically about the 100 Women Awards.
So this is one of those things. When BBC came, you know, people always are like, oh, you top 10 women in this. And that.
Yeah.
So you're just like, you know, it's just one of those lists that I didn't think would mean much about anything, to be honest with you.
You forgot the significant part of being the first African.
Oh yes, you know, yes.
Yeah.
But I think it's just when they approached me to be on the list, I was just like, oh, okay, you know. But after that, I just closed that book. But then it just spiked, like it just.
Wow.
And it actually, you know, all of these things build your currency. And your currency to negotiate in different spaces. You know, this is one thing that I have learned. People would say, for instance, also, you know, why do you have to kind of name these things? Like, oh, you know, the first woman, the organism, the thing is, when you're a minority group, your bargaining power is extremely limited. Extremely, extremely limited. So the more you're in platforms of influence, it amasses your bargaining power. So it's just like, so for some of us, we really do need to kind of name these things. And I saw with BBC that as soon as BBC came out, even the responses to the people who came to me to work and my negotiating power, it was much easier than before that, you know? So it's just, yeah.
So maybe just to go back for, you know, the benefit of others, that you're one of the people who actually you may make Tusini to be
Oh,
what she
mercy.
is. Because you were part of the
Yes.
panel of
Yes.
Miss South Africa,
Yes.
and then which eventually she went on to join
Yes.
to that contest of Miss Universe,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So how was that? Maybe you are the love of her life.
I think, apart from like
We're talking about Zozimbili, by the way.
Zozi, yes,
Yeah.
Zozi Tutsi. I think Zozi was just, also maybe it's because this was my first experience of something like this. She was just magic, But also, I think
She was
there was a turning tide that you could feel without me not saying more, because of course you've got confidentiality agreements.
Yes.
But one of the things that I would say was defining for the judges is there was the idea that we believed Miss Universe had of beauty, but we had to ask ourselves, as South Africans, what ideas do we have? Let's forget what beauty ideals are. Like looking at the consolidated version, and so they had a strong competition. Those women were amazing. This was not an easy. It wasn't like you look at it now and it looked like it was she had tough competition. The women there were incredible. I don't want to lie, and we had to look at what consolidates our view on who we want to represent us there. Uniquely ours. Never mind what Miss Universe thinks about what, never mind what the world is. Tina.
Yeah.
What consolidates our
You
view.
need to be realistic to yourself.
And we did but also I think we just didn't want the pressure of other people's ideas of what beauty is, or what, all of that stuff. We didn't want the pressure, because even just something like natural hair, if you look at it, Zozi was an outlier in her at Miss Universe, But people who were coming into that competition from Miss South Africa, a lot of women now started having natural hair.
I remember that.
And I was looking at this and I was just
I remember at ENCA.
The variety.
At ENCA, the lady was actually covering a story at the Miss Universe while she was coming back. The reporter at ENCA was doing that, actually had that style as well. You say, oh, what? In fact, there was I remember they took a pic of her in a video rising while she was at the salon doing that style, same style. That this is where we had him as South African now. It was so nice, people, to take natural in a very serious way.
Yes. I think, the thing about it is, as people who work in a space of representation, again, this is not a judgment on beauty choice. If you want to pull your weave, baby girl,
it's okay.
just go do whatever makes you feel like you are present and you are enjoying your body and you are expressing your beauty. The only thing is, for me, as people who are in spaces of representation, we need to create options of representation. And seeing a black woman in a weave was something that was placed on a high status. But you want to know that a black woman with natural hair is also placed in an equally high status. Then you really know that you've got options. But if you feel like, if I have natural hair, will they pick me? When you start asking this that means that we haven't created enough representational options for you to feel like you'll still be seen if you present yourself in that way. So I think for me, if actually is to create options for women. If I know that if I dress up this way and I can be fully received.
Yes.
I don't have to amend myself, So, yeah.
But what to say to just a young girl out there who's watching, to say, I want to be like Thando, I want to be a model. I want to represent South Africa in the global world, Yeah, and I look up to Thando, someone who's been following you, someone who like, Mom, this is the girl I was talking about. Or this is the woman, this is the lady I
I'm
was
going
talking
to say
about.
something that is so brutal.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say to that girl, you cannot be like Thando, you can only
Be yourself. Yeah.
Thando's taken.
Mm.
You need to find
Create
what
the
brings
you.
in. Exactly. You need to find what brings in your authenticity. You know, what brings in the best resources that you have. You know, whatever it is, there's somebody who said, I think it was Eric Bedu, try and do things that come easy to you, like as a skill. Things that you find that are very interesting. Try and do things that come easier to you. Because you see me, like, my father was like, do accounting. That was not going to come easy to me.
Yes.
But articulating myself and solving problems through language, and I could do that. So I could find myself better placed in law. And you can see that even when I became a model, the skills that came out were skills that were already there. Which was like how I articulated myself through language and how I would have certain perspectives. And I built on that. Because as soon as I became a model and I saw I started reading critical race theory, disability theory, feminism. I empowered myself with language and perspective. Because I knew in this platform, this is how I can make a change. You don't know what your change is. You have to investigate yourself and find out what are my interests and how can I use those to pour them out for the good of community and society. Because we always love, we use public roads, we use, books that were brought in by several intellectuals to build ourselves. But next thing when we make it, we want to privatize everything, Then it's like, it's my stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
All of this, like, community built me, but when I get stuff, then it's my stuff. So it's just like, I just think just get to a space where all your interests and your skills are at a place where you are actually serving, you're of servitude to your community and your society. And in terms of like representation, it does not matter where you go. It does not matter where you go. As long as you were born here, you're always representing. The difference is you need to be aware of it.
Yes.
You need to be aware that you're carrying many people. I always say, my father, when I was young, I can't speak Xhosa, shame. There's shame.
Yeah, I remember.
It's an epic fail.
Yeah.
But he would teach me, like, Itagazelo. And he would teach me that and one thing that taught me is that wherever I go, I am carried by many people and I carry many people. It is a legacy formed thing that we have as Abantu Abamnyama. That you say, I come from somewhere. Exactly. I don't come here alone, I come from somewhere. And I am from a people that are carrying me, but I'm also carrying them. So as South African, as Black, as Umwewe, remember that you are carrying community in this body. And they are also carrying you because your hopes and your dreams, they are rooting for you. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure you must have now understand that anyone as a child maybe watching, you can be a model. As long as you become you. Don't try to be
also, one of the things is always don't look at the cosmetics of what you do. It's, if I'm a model, I can make all this money. That's all great. Money is important, guys. It's important. I'm never going to downplay how important money is. But that's not the thing, is that being a model, you're in the business of representation. The body is used as a medium to communicate certain ideas. So if you want to be a model, take the work seriously. Take it, because that work has influence and impact on how we see ourselves. So don't just think that, I'm just wearing clothes, I'm just doing no, the projects that you do, all of that stuff, you're communicating certain ideas. Always embrace the power of what you do. Don't let people tell you that it's small, because it's not.
It's not.
It's not.
Indeed, yes. So talking about Thando Hopa, when you're at home relaxed, what is it that you do? You're not working now, it's just your easy weekend, you're listening to music, or you doing your 9 nice dishes for the weekend. They say several colors on a Sunday. What do? Do you go to church?
I'm such a pedestrian cook, So I grew up Christian.
Okay.
But
all that changed.
That changed. But I am a person who is very curious about different kinds of religions.
Okay.
It's just that I feel like I have not found my home in them. But I do think they give very potent lessons and perspectives.
Yes.
And also I think that, for me, I don't really subscribe to religion, but I understand people who do. Because I think that it really helps sustain you even if the world, I've seen people who are very religious and I've seen the world crumble before them and I've seen them stand tall and strong, So I think that religion has people that it holds well,
Okay.
But so no, I don't go to church. I don't go to church.
But you do relax and do certain other things.
I love listening to audiobooks. That's my favorite thing.
Okay.
I love listening to audiobooks because I just feel like I get to access people's minds and worldviews, and I feel like it's a form of mentorship for me to go through a book, because then you help me figure out the world, But also books, I always say books help you travel the world while just being in one place.
That's true. That is so true.
So yeah, basically reading is that's my... Yeah.
But with regard to music, I thought maybe we will wrap it up with Angelique Kidjo. I know that.
She's my mentor.
A serious mentor indeed.
She's my
when
mentor,
I sing way. And what is another song? There's another song that people love dearly when you're talking Angelique Kidjo. Yeah. Akolo.
Yes,
great
yes.
African, now she's an international, she's even an actor now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actor, humanitarian, she's a force to be reckoned.
Yeah, maybe you can tell our audience now the reason why I call you my daughter.
You tell them.
Because I know people are waiting for that. We started with that, why a daughter? I know you are my daughter's namesake. That's the reason why. And
I had forgotten. I was like, no, he's putting me on the spot now. Oh yes, by the way. His daughter has the same name. Yes. No, that's a beautiful name that you gave your daughter. If I do say so myself.
Thando, that's love. And you change when you change it Thando to English, it's Amanda.
Oh really?
Yeah, worthy of love as well. So she's Thando Amanda Twala. So it's Thando times 2.
That's beautiful. In English, Amanda.
I know it's in some, not necessarily English. Maybe it might be Greek or something.
Or Celtic or whatever. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
No, but that's
No, man, it's good to have you, and thank you so much for visiting us in our studio. You've embraced the Ilovo Studios. And everyone, please do continue to subscribe, and you can always comment on just on the bottom as to how was the episode today. We're still continuing with the celebration and the commemoration of our women of the South. This is Happy Dayz on Podcast and out.
Subscribe and become a member of the biggest family, the Happy Dayz on Podcast family.